tonight, you don't need to do anything. Just step gently into a small wooden boat. And let the quiet rhythm of the water carry you across a peaceful lake. With each soft ripple, and every slow stroke of the oar, you'll discover calming, gentle facts, designed to ease your mind, and guide you into deep, restful sleep. There is a particular kind of stillness that greets you just before dawn on a lake. The water holds the sky like a mirror that hasn't yet been disturbed, and the air carries that cool, mineral scent that only open water gives off in the early hours. This is the moment a rower lives for, that breath between standing on the bank and sliding the oar into the water for the very first time. Before we even push off, though, it's worth pausing to look at what we're holding. The oar itself. It seems simple enough, a long shaft, a flat blade, but the word carries centuries of history in its grain. The word oar traces back to the Old Norse ar, a reminder that the people who first mapped the cold lakes and fjords of the north did so by hand, stroke by stroke, long before engines existed to carry them. The oar was not just a tool. It was the engine, the compass, and in many ways, the companion. Now, take the blade and look at its shape. It's not flat in the way a paddle is flat. It's slightly cupped, like a shallow spoon. This concave face is what allows an oar to catch water rather than simply push against it, a subtle engineering detail that dramatically increases the efficiency of each stroke. The blade presses into the water and the curved surface creates resistance across its entire face rather than just at the tip, propelling the boat forward with a clean, satisfying pull. Rowers call this moment of connection the catch, and with good reason. You are quite literally catching the lake. As the boat slides out from the bank and the first ripple fans out from the hull, something beautiful begins. Those ripples, those quiet, spreading rings of disturbed water, are not random. A ripple on still water travels outward in a nearly perfect circle because water is uniform in all directions from the point of disturbance. This is a principle of physics so reliable you could set your watch by it. When the oar enters the lake and breaks the surface tension, it sends energy radiating outward equally in every direction, and that symmetry, that perfect ring expanding across the surface, is one of the quiet wonders of early morning rowing. Those ripples don't just reveal physics, either. They tell stories. A careful rower learns to read the surface of a lake the way a reader learns to read a page. Wind-driven ripples run in parallel lines, while the ripples of a submerged creature moving just beneath the surface look altogether different, more irregular, more urgent, almost like a secret being whispered by the water itself. The surface tension of a calm lake is strong enough to support small insects like water striders, and when you glide close enough, you can sometimes see their delicate legs resting in tiny dimples on the skin of the water, each one a small miracle of balance and lightness. Row further out and the lake reveals more of itself. The bottom drops away and the color of the water deepens, from the pale green-brown of the shallows to something darker and bluer toward the middle. Light penetrates freshwater lakes to varying depths depending on clarity, but even in the clearest lakes, little usable sunlight reaches beyond about 200 meters. The rest is cold and dark and still. But here in the shallows, in the warm-lit upper layers, life is extraordinary. Aquatic plants wave from below like slow flags in an underwater wind, and among their stems, fish are already moving about their morning business. And this is where the lake truly comes alive beneath you. If you are patient, and if the early light is on your side, you may catch the glint of a fish just below the surface, and then, if you are very lucky, you may see something that rowers and anglers have marveled at for generations, a fish breaking the surface in a sudden, shining arc. Fish leap above the water surface for several reasons: to escape predators, to dislodge parasites, to pursue insects, or sometimes simply in response to changes in barometric pressure. A leap is not random. It is purposeful, instinctive, and spectacular. The fish rises, hangs for a fraction of a second in the air, briefly a creature of two worlds, and disappears back into the water with a sound like a stone dropped into silk. The sound of that re-entry ripples outward and mingles with the sound of your own oars, and rowing on a quiet lake offers a kind of music that most people never take the time to hear. The dip and pull, the soft clunk of the oar in its rowlock, the drip of water from the raised blade, these sounds are old. They have been part of human life for thousands of years. Archaeological evidence suggests that rowing vessels have been in use for at least 4,000 years, with ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian artwork depicting oared boats on rivers and lakes long before the written record had a reliable vocabulary to describe them. When you row, you are participating in something genuinely ancient. Your hands on those oars belong to a lineage stretching back further than almost any other human activity connected to the water. There is something comforting in that thought as the boat moves slowly toward the heart of the lake. The trees on the far bank are reflected beneath you, and you are suspended between two skies. Freshwater lakes cover approximately 1.3% of the Earth's surface, yet they hold the drinking water, the food, the spiritual significance, and the quiet beauty that entire civilizations have been built around. A lake is not just a body of water. It is a living system, a breathing, cycling, endlessly complex world that rewards those who slow down enough to pay attention. Underscore 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 underscore. And slowing down is, perhaps, the greatest gift that a rowing journey gives you. Unlike powered boats that cut across the water with noise and urgency, the rower moves at a pace set by muscle and breath, and at that pace, everything changes. A recreational rower traveling across a calm lake typically moves at between 3 and 5 kilometers per hour, which is roughly the same speed as a person walking. It is the speed at which human beings have always been able to truly observe the world around them. Fast enough to travel. Slow enough to see. At this speed, a kingfisher becomes visible where it would otherwise be a blur. The way the morning light changes on the water from minute to minute becomes something you can actually watch rather than merely glance at. And the fish, those flashes of silver and gold just beneath the hull, become companions rather than glimpses. The water stretches ahead, the bank falls slowly behind, and the lake opens up around you. This is where the journey begins. Not just across the water, but inward, into a quieter way of moving through the world, with an oar in your hand and a surface full of stories beneath your hull. There is much more to discover. We are only just beginning. The lake has a way of teaching you things you didn't know you needed to learn. As the boat drifts forward and the rhythm of the oars settles into something natural and unhurried, the water around you begins to speak, not loudly, not urgently, but in the quiet language of texture and color and movement that rewards anyone willing to pay attention. Look down into the water beside the hull and you will notice that the lake is not one thing. It is many things layered on top of one another. Even on a warm summer morning, if you were to trail your hand over the side and let it sink just a foot or two beneath the surface, you would feel the temperature shift. What begins as relatively warm, sun-touched water gives way surprisingly quickly to something noticeably cooler below. This is not an accident of the morning. It is a permanent feature of the lake's inner life. Lakes naturally separate into distinct thermal layers during warmer months, a warm upper layer called the epilimnion, a transitional zone of rapid temperature change called the thermocline, and a cold, dense bottom layer called the hypolimnion. These layers don't mix easily, and fish know them intimately, migrating between levels throughout the day in search of the right temperature for feeding and rest. It is this invisible architecture of the lake, these hidden layers stacked silently beneath your boat, that shapes nearly everything happening below the surface. The fish you might hope to glimpse aren't scattered randomly through the water. They follow temperature gradients, oxygen levels, and light the way you might follow a familiar road home. On a morning like this one, with the sun still low and the surface cool, many species will be near the top, feeding actively before the heat of the day drives them deeper. And feeding, for a lake fish, is a matter of extraordinary precision. A trout, for instance, can detect a single insect landing on the water's surface from several meters away, not by sight alone, but by sensing the tiny pressure waves that radiate outward from the point of impact. Fish possess a remarkable sensory system called the lateral line, a row of fluid-filled canals running along each side of the body, which detects minute vibrations and pressure changes in the surrounding water. It is, in a sense, a form of touch at a distance. The fish feels the lake the way you might feel a vibration through a floorboard, and it acts on that information with a speed and accuracy that no amount of patience at the rod quite prepares you for. This is partly why a careful rower is such a welcome companion to the serious observer of lake life. The oars, when used well, disturb surprisingly little. The blade enters the water cleanly, pulls, and exits with minimal splash, and between strokes, the boat glides in near silence. Contrast this with the bow wave and engine noise of a motorized vessel, and the difference is profound. Under or power, the rower becomes something closer to a part of the lake than an intrusion upon it, and the lake responds accordingly. Birds settle nearby. Fish hold their position rather than darting. The whole scene relaxes. That relaxation of the natural world around a quiet rowing boat is one of the experience's greatest rewards. Along the reed beds at the lake's edge, where the water is shallow and sun-warmed, dragonflies patrol their invisible territories with the confidence of creatures who have been doing this for a very long time. And they have. Dragonflies as a group have existed for roughly 300 million years, making them one of the oldest winged insects on Earth. The ones hovering just above the water's surface this morning are, in evolutionary terms, essentially unchanged from ancestors that flew over ancient swamps long before the first dinosaur appeared. There is something quietly staggering about that thought as they hover and dart in the morning light. Further out, past the reeds and into the open water, the rowing settles into its truest rhythm. The body finds its pattern, lean forward, drop the blade, pull through, feather and recover, and the mind begins to loosen its grip on the ordinary concerns of the day. This is not a coincidence. The repetitive, bilateral nature of rowing, engaging both sides of the body in a synchronized rhythm, has been shown to have a measurable calming effect on the nervous system, and many rowers describe a meditative quality to a long, steady row that is difficult to achieve by other means. The water ahead opens up and the far bank seems both closer and further away than it did when you first set out. Distances are difficult to judge on a lake. The absence of landmarks at eye level, the way the horizon curves subtly at the edges of your vision, the shimmering quality of morning light on open water, all of it conspires to make the lake feel larger than it is, and the feeling of being genuinely out on open water begins to settle in. Beneath that open water, life continues on a scale the surface barely hints at. A healthy lake ecosystem can support dozens of species simultaneously, all occupying different niches, different depths, different feeding times. Phytoplankton, microscopic algae floating in the sunlit upper layers, form the base of the entire food chain, and despite their invisibility to the naked eye, they are responsible for producing a significant portion of the oxygen dissolved in the water. Without them, the lake would fall silent. Every fish, every insect, every bird feeding at the water's edge owes something to these invisible green threads at the bottom of the web. A fish breaks the surface 30 meters to the left, a sudden silver flash and then gone, leaving behind a ring of ripples that spreads and softens and eventually disappears as if it were never there at all. You watch the ring until it fades and find yourself thinking about impermanence, about how the lake holds its disturbances so briefly before returning to its original calm. A single large lake can cycle its entire water volume through evaporation, inflow, and outflow over periods ranging from weeks to thousands of years, a measure called the water residence time. Lake Superior, one of the world's great freshwater lakes, has a water residence time of approximately 191 years, meaning the water molecules making up its body are, on average, nearly 2 centuries old. The water you are rowing across this morning has its own age, its own history of rain and snow and underground springs and decades of quiet accumulation. It did not arrive here overnight. That sense of age, of deep time, settles gently over the boat as the oars continue their rhythm. The lake has been here far longer than either of us, and with any luck, it will be here long after. For now, though, it is ours to move quietly across, reading its surface, listening to its sounds, and letting it, in its own unhurried way, read us back. The morning is still young. The far bank is getting closer. You know you are in the middle of the lake when the bank behind you and the bank ahead of you look roughly the same distance away, and neither one feels particularly close. There is a particular kind of freedom in that position, a brief loosening of the ordinary world that happens when you are equidistant from all edges, suspended in the open. The water here is deeper, darker, and has a quality of stillness that the shallows never quite manage. Even the sound changes. The faint background noise of the land, birdsong in the trees, the rustle of leaves, softens and recedes, and what remains is the water, the oars, and your own breathing. It is here, in the deeper open water, that the lake reveals its true scale. What looked manageable from the bank now feels genuinely large, and that shift in perspective is one of rowing's quiet gifts. The oars pull steadily, the boat glides, and with each stroke the surface gives back a little more of itself. And the surface, looked at closely, is never truly still, even when the wind is barely a whisper. There is always some movement, a long, slow undulation that rolls beneath the boat with the lazy patience of something ancient. These long, low waves, nearly imperceptible unless you are lying flat on the water looking sideways across it, are called seiches. A seiche is a standing wave that forms when wind or changes in atmospheric pressure cause water to pile up on one side of a lake and then oscillate back and forth like water in a tilted bowl. Large lakes can experience seiches powerful enough to cause noticeable rises and falls in water level at their shores, sometimes long after the wind that created them has died away entirely. The deeper you go into the heart of the lake, the more you become aware of what is beneath you. In the right conditions, clear water, high sun, a boat moving slowly, you can sometimes see extraordinary distances downward, the light filtering through in shafts that fade from green to deep blue-black. Fresh water is, in its purest form, almost completely transparent, and it is only the suspended particles of sediment, algae, and organic matter that give lake water its characteristic color. A lake with very low levels of these particles is called oligotrophic, nutrient-poor, crystal clear, and often strikingly blue, while a lake rich in nutrients and algae takes on greens and browns. The color of the water you are rowing across tells you something real about the health and character of the ecosystem below. Looking down through clear water on a calm morning, movement catches your eye. A shape drifts along the edge of a weed bed far below, long, slow, unhurried. A pike, most likely, doing what pike do best, which is very little, very patiently, for a very long time. Pike are ambush predators of extraordinary effectiveness, capable of remaining nearly motionless for extended periods before accelerating to strike with a burst of speed that can reach 8 meters per second. They are a lake's quiet apex, lurking in the green half-light with a stillness that the water itself seems to approve of. Watching one from above, from the strange vantage point of a drifting boat, you understand why people have always found something slightly mythological about them. The boat moves on and the pike disappears back into its shadows. Above the water, the sky has brightened considerably since the first strokes of the morning, and the lake's surface is beginning to catch the light in a way that makes every ripple throw a tiny, dancing reflection upward. This scattered light on the underside of the water's surface, seen from below by fish and other aquatic creatures, forms a phenomenon known as Snell's window, a circular window of the above-water world visible through the surface, surrounded by a mirror-like reflection of the lake bed. Outside that circular window, the surface acts as a perfect mirror. Inside it, a fish looking upward can see the entire hemisphere of the sky and land compressed into a single circle of light. It is a completely different visual experience of the same world you are sitting in, and the knowledge of it changes how you look at the surface of the water, knowing something below might be looking back up at you through that shimmering, compressed circle of sky. There is a companionship in that thought. The lake is not empty. It has never been empty. Every square meter of open water hosts dozens of forms of life, from the barely visible to the impressively large, and all of them are going about their business with a focus and purpose that puts any distracted human morning to shame. Zooplankton drift in vast, invisible clouds just below the surface, grazing on phytoplankton and in turn being grazed upon by small fish. These tiny animals, most no larger than a grain of rice, form one of the most important links in the freshwater food chain. Their daily migration, sinking deeper during daylight hours to avoid predators, then rising toward the surface at dusk to feed, is one of the most predictable and significant mass movements of animals on Earth, happening in lakes all over the world every single day, in near total silence and near total invisibility. The oars dip and rise, dip and rise. A dragonfly appears from nowhere, hovers at the bow of the boat with the apparent curiosity of a creature checking its territory, and then vanishes just as suddenly. The water ahead is open and glittering and full of depth. You are halfway across something that has taken millions of years to become what it is, and you are crossing it at walking pace, with 2 pieces of shaped wood and a calm pair of arms. There is no better way to do it. There never has been. Somewhere beneath the hull, the thermocline holds its invisible border between warmth and cold, between the lit world and the dark one. The lake turns, breathes, and carries you forward. The far bank is no longer quite so far. There is a particular quality to the water in the deeper parts of a lake that you can feel before you can explain it. The boat seems to sit differently, somehow, a little more supported, a little more held. The oars pull through something with slightly more presence than the shallower water near the banks, and the silence beneath you feels genuinely deep rather than merely quiet. This is the part of the lake that rewards imagination, because what lies below is largely invisible and yet entirely real, a world running parallel to yours, complete in itself, governed by pressures and temperatures and currents that the surface gives almost no hint of. The bottom of a lake is not bare. It is not simply mud and darkness and the occasional lost fishing lure. It is one of the richest and most complex habitats in the freshwater world, covered in a layer of fine organic sediment called lake mud, or gitcha, which accumulates over centuries as plant material, dead organisms, and mineral particles slowly drift down and settle. This sediment layer is extraordinarily informative. Scientists who study lake history, a discipline called paleolimnology, extract long cores of this sediment and read them like a diary of everything the lake has experienced across thousands of years. Pollen grains preserved in the deepest layers can reveal what forests surrounded the lake before recorded history. Traces of ash tell of volcanic eruptions. Shifts in algae species mark ancient climate changes. The bottom of the lake is an archive, and it has been quietly writing itself for longer than human civilization has existed. Row slowly enough and you begin to notice things at the lake's edge that you would miss at any greater speed. Along the shallow margins where sunlight reaches the bottom, aquatic plants grow in dense, swaying communities: reeds, water lilies, pondweed, hornwort, each species occupying its own preferred depth and light level with a precision that seems almost deliberate. Water lilies, those familiar and beautiful surface dwellers, have stems that can extend several meters from their roots on the lake bed to their floating leaves above. The flat, round leaves, called lily pads, are coated on their upper surface with a microscopic waxy texture that causes water to bead and roll off rather than sit and accumulate, a property so effective that materials scientists have spent decades studying and replicating it for industrial waterproofing applications. The lotus effect, as it is known, is one of nature's most elegant engineering solutions, and it has been growing quietly on lake surfaces for millions of years. Beneath those lily pads, in the cool green shade they cast on the water below, fish gather with purpose. The shade offers protection from aerial predators, herons, ospreys, kingfishers, and the underside of the lily pad itself often hosts colonies of tiny invertebrates that make easy, reliable meals. A large pike will sometimes hold position in lily pad shade for hours, so still and so perfectly colored against the dappled green light that it becomes effectively invisible until the precise moment it chooses not to be. The relationship between surface vegetation and the fish living beneath it is one of the most tightly woven partnerships in a lake ecosystem, each depending on the other in ways that took ecologists decades to fully appreciate. The oars continue their rhythm, and the boat passes through a patch of open water where the bottom is briefly visible, pale sand and small stones in the shallower zone, the kind of clean gravel bed that certain fish prize above everything else. Brown trout and their relatives seek out exactly this kind of substrate for spawning, fanning small depressions in the gravel with their tails to create nests called redds, where eggs can be laid and fertilized in the clean, well-oxygenated water that flows between the stones. A single female brown trout can deposit between 1,000 and 2,000 eggs per kilogram of her body weight, making the gravel beds of a healthy lake an extraordinary nursery of potential life each autumn. The eggs lie hidden in the stones through the cold months, developing slowly, waiting for the water temperature to rise enough to signal that the world above is ready for them. Water temperature governs so much of what happens in a lake that it is difficult to overstate its importance. Fish are ectothermic, meaning their body temperature matches that of their surroundings, and their entire physiology, digestion, reproduction, immune function, activity level, responds directly to changes in the water around them. A rise of just a few degrees can accelerate a fish's metabolism significantly, causing it to feed more aggressively and move more actively. A drop toward winter temperatures slows everything down, pushing many species into a state of reduced activity that resembles, though is not precisely the same as, hibernation. This sensitivity to temperature means that fish movements through a lake across the seasons trace the same thermal gradients reliably year after year, a predictability that experienced anglers and wildlife observers have mapped with patient attention over generations. The morning is fully established now, the light broad and confident across the water, and the lake has shifted from its dawn palette of silver and gray into something warmer and more golden. Small insects have begun to hatch at the surface, midges mostly, rising in delicate spiraling columns just above the water, their brief adult lives beginning and ending within a day or two. For the lake, this hatch is a significant event. The emerging insects trigger feeding activity across species and across the water column, drawing fish to the surface and birds to the air simultaneously, a brief window of abundance that the whole ecosystem responds to with a kind of collective urgency. Watching it happen from a quietly drifting rowing boat, with the oars resting across the gunwales and the lake moving gently beneath you, feels less like observation and more like being admitted, temporarily, into something private and extraordinary. The far bank is drawing closer now, its trees reflected cleanly in the brightening water. But there is no hurry. The lake does not hurry, and on a morning like this one, neither should you. Let the oars rest a moment. Watch the insects rise. Listen to the water say whatever it is saying. There will be time enough to reach the other side. The far bank arrives slowly, the way all good things do when you are traveling at the pace of your own arms. What was a dark smudge of tree lean an hour ago has resolved itself into something detailed and alive, individual trees leaning over the water, their roots gripping the bank with the casual confidence of things that have stood in one place for a very long time. The water here is shallower again, and lighter, and the change in the lake's character is immediate. Where the open middle was expansive and deep and carried a sense of infinite downward space, the margins here are intimate and layered and full of small, particular life going about its business with no interest in being observed. Slow the oars and let the boat drift the last few meters. The reeds along the bank are extraordinary up close, tall, straight, and packed so densely that the interior of the reed bed is effectively its own world, a dim green corridor of water and stem where sound moves differently and the light arrives in thin, shifting columns. Common reed, the species most frequently found at the edges of temperate lakes, is one of the most widely distributed flowering plants on Earth, growing on every continent except Antarctica. A single reed stem is hollow and segmented, and this structure gives it a combination of flexibility and tensile strength that engineers have studied with genuine admiration. A reed can bend nearly flat in a strong wind and return to vertical without damage, a performance that would destroy most rigid structures of comparable height and thinness. Within the reed bed, the noise is different. Sounds that travel freely across open water are absorbed and scattered by the dense stems, and what replaces them is a private, rustling quiet broken by the occasional sharp call of a reed warbler or the splash of a moorhen moving invisibly through the stems. The birds that nest in reed beds have adapted to their environment in ways that are nothing short of remarkable. The reed warbler, a small brown bird of quiet appearance and considerable vocal talent, builds its nest by weaving plant fibers around several vertical reed stems simultaneously, creating a deep cup suspended above the water that sways with the reeds in the wind without ever coming loose. It is a feat of structural engineering achieved without hands, without tools, and without any material other than what the reed bed itself provides. The boat settles near the bank and the water here has a warmth that the open lake did not. Sunlight has been working on these shallows since first light, and the effect is a few degrees of temperature difference that makes a significant biological impact. Warm, shallow, vegetated margins like these are the nursery grounds of the lake, the places where juvenile fish spend their earliest weeks, hidden among plant stems, feeding on microscopic invertebrates, and doing their utmost to avoid the attention of anything larger than themselves. The larvae of many freshwater fish are so small at hatching that they are essentially transparent, their internal organs dimly visible through their skin, tiny engines of survival running on reserves of yolk that sustain them for only a matter of days before they must begin feeding for themselves. The first days of a fish's life are the most dangerous it will ever face, with mortality rates in some species exceeding 90% before the fish reaches a centimeter in length. Rest the oars fully and simply sit for a moment. The bank holds its own kind of reward for the still and the quiet. Just at the waterline, where the wet mud meets the base of the reeds, the surface is covered in the tracks of birds and small mammals that came here in the night, the splayed three-toed prints of a heron that stood for long minutes in the shallows, the tiny paired impressions of a water vole moving along the bank's edge in the dark. Water voles are among the most charming and least seen of lakeside mammals, spending much of their lives in burrow systems excavated into the soft bank just above the waterline. They are strong swimmers and will take to the water readily when alarmed, producing a characteristic plop as they enter that has become the informal sound effect of the English countryside. A water vole's burrow system can extend several meters into the bank and include separate chambers for sleeping, food storage, and the raising of young, a sophisticated home built entirely by an animal small enough to sit in a cupped pair of hands. Look closely at the mud itself and the story continues. The margins of a lake accumulate some of the finest sediment in the entire system, and in that soft, dark layer, oxygen disappears within a centimeter or two of the surface. Just beneath that thin oxygenated skin, entirely anaerobic conditions exist, no free oxygen at all, and yet life persists there too, in the form of specialized bacteria that break down organic matter through chemical processes that require no oxygen whatsoever. These anaerobic decomposers are responsible for the characteristic smell of disturbed lake mud, that rich, slightly sulfurous scent that rises when you push a paddle into soft-bottom sediment, which is in fact the smell of hydrogen sulfide produced as a byproduct of bacterial metabolism. It is one of the oldest smells in the biological world, a chemical signature of microbial life doing what it has done for billions of years. A fish leaps near the reed bed, close enough that you hear the intake of breath the surface makes as the fish re-enters, a small, perfect sound immediately swallowed by the quiet. The rings spread outward and reach the reeds, where they become tiny lapping movements against the stems, barely audible, barely there. The lake absorbs the event completely within seconds and returns to its vast, patient calm. This is the edge of things, and edges, in ecology as in life, are where the most interesting meetings happen. The boundary between open water and reed bed, between lake and land, between the submerged and the aerial, is called an ecotone, and ecotones consistently support higher species diversity than either of the habitats on either side of them. Where two worlds meet, the range of available niches multiplies, and life, given a niche, will always find a way to fill it. Sitting here at the far bank, with the open lake behind you and the rustling reed bed ahead, you are sitting at exactly that boundary, in the richest, most various, most alive part of the whole system. Take a long breath. The water is warm here, and the morning is generous, and there is no need to push off just yet. There is a moment in every rowing journey when you turn the boat around, and it always feels like a small event. Not an ending, the lake is far too generous for that, but a shift in the story, a change in what the water means. The bank you pushed off from this morning, which felt like departure, now becomes destination, and the whole quality of the rowing changes with that reversal. Where the outward journey was about discovery, the return is about accumulation, carrying everything the water has given you back across the surface toward the place where the day began. The turn itself is worth doing slowly. Feather one oar and pull the other, and the boat pivots on its center with a grace that still feels satisfying after years of doing it. As the bow swings around, the lake rearranges itself, what was behind becomes ahead, and the angle of the light on the water shifts completely. The same lake looks different from this direction, the shadows falling differently, the reflections of the tree-line appearing at a new angle, and for a moment the familiar becomes briefly strange before settling back into itself. This is one of the small, reliable pleasures of a return crossing. The lake offers you a second version of itself, and if you are paying attention, it is never quite the same as the first. The breeze, which was barely noticeable on the outward journey, has picked up slightly since mid-morning, as breezes on lakes tend to do. Water heats more slowly than land, and as the surrounding land warms through the morning, the air above it rises and cooler air from over the lake's surface moves in to replace it, creating the gentle onshore breezes that are a reliable feature of calm weather lake mornings. This differential heating between land and water is the same mechanism that drives sea breezes on coastlines, and on a small lake it produces winds of modest but real consequence, enough to raise a light chop on the surface, enough to push the boat slightly off course between strokes, enough to make the rowing feel pleasantly purposeful rather than merely effortless. The chop, when it comes, changes the character of the water entirely. Where the surface was glassy and reflective on the outward row, it is now textured and moving, each small wave catching the higher sun and throwing it back in broken, shifting pieces of light. Rowing into a light chop requires a small adjustment of technique. The blade enters the water with a little more authority, the recovery is slightly lower to keep the oar clear of the wave tops, and these adjustments happen almost unconsciously after enough time on the water. The body learns the lake the way it learns any repeated physical experience, storing the adjustments as muscle memory until they become simply part of what rowing feels like rather than active decisions made in the moment. The light on the water at this hour is extraordinary. The sun has climbed past its morning angle and is now striking the surface more directly, and the effect on the lake's color is dramatic. The blues and greens of mid-morning have deepened, and the shadows cast by the small waves have sharpened into something almost three-dimensional. Water has a unique optical property called the Fresnel effect, which means that the amount of light it reflects versus absorbs changes dramatically depending on the angle at which light strikes its surface. At very low angles, as at dawn and dusk, water reflects most of the light that hits it, acting almost as a perfect mirror. At high sun angles, as now, much more light penetrates the surface rather than reflecting away, and the lake becomes transparent rather than reflective. The shift between these two states, visible to any attentive rower over the course of a morning, is one of the most beautiful optical transitions in the natural world. Beneath that now transparent surface, the lake's inhabitants are responding to the changing conditions with the reliability of creatures who have never needed a clock. Midwater fish that were feeding actively near the surface in the cool, low-light hours of early morning have begun their daily descent toward the thermocline, following the cooler water downward as the surface warms. Perch, those handsome striped fish with their distinctive spiny dorsal fin, are particularly faithful to this daily rhythm. They are shoaling fish for much of their lives, and a shoal of perch moving through a lake in formation, dozens of fish holding their relative positions as they turn and descend together, is one of the most coordinated and elegant spectacles the freshwater world produces, entirely invisible from above unless the light and water clarity conspire to reveal it. The oars find their rhythm again and the home bank begins its slow approach. A heron, which has been standing with geological patience at the water's edge since before the boat turned, finally decides that the approaching hull represents something worth reconsidering. It lifts with a slow, prehistoric wing beat, those enormous gray wings carrying its unlikely body upward with an effort that looks more reluctant than powerful, and folds itself into a long, straight silhouette heading low across the water toward a quieter section of bank. The gray heron is the tallest bird found regularly at European lakesides, capable of standing completely motionless in shallow water for extraordinarily long periods while hunting. It catches fish using a strike so fast it is essentially invisible to the human eye. The neck, coiled in an S-curve during the waiting period, uncoils and drives the bill into the water with a speed that can exceed the blink of a human eye in duration. Patient, precise, and almost entirely without waste of movement, The heron is the rowing boat of the bird world, beautifully adapted to doing the most with the least. The wind brushes across the surface and the boat lifts slightly over a small wave, and the oars pull, and the home bank is perhaps 10 minutes away now. The lake holds all the morning's accumulated experience, the ripples, the leaping fish, the invisible thermocline, the reed beds and their hidden birds, the ancient sediment writing its slow diary at the bottom, and you carry it too, in the way that any journey worth taking leaves something behind in the body that outlasts the return. The water does not keep score of the people who have crossed it. But it offers itself equally to everyone who pushes off from its bank with a pair of oars and a willingness to pay attention, and that, in the quiet arithmetic of a morning well spent, is more than enough. The far bank recedes. The home bank draws close. The oars continue their work. The lake at midday is a different creature entirely from the lake at dawn. Where the early morning water was cool and secretive, holding its colors close and its sounds low, the afternoon lake opens itself with something approaching extravagance. The light falls full and direct on the surface, the warmth has settled into the boat's wooden planks, and the rhythm of the oars carries a comfortable heaviness that speaks of hours already spent well on the water. This is the long, golden middle of a rowing day, not the sharp, expectant beginning, not the reflective homeward end, but the generous, unhurried expanse in between, when the lake and the rower have fully adjusted to each other's presence and everything becomes a little easier, a little slower, a little more itself. Pull the oars in and let the boat drift for a while. There is no rule that says a rowing journey must be all rowing. The drift has its own rewards, and the afternoon is well suited to them. The boat turns slowly on whatever microcurrents the warming surface produces, and the world rotates around you at the pace of something completely unconcerned with time. In this drifting stillness, the lake's surface sounds become more distinct, the tiny clicking of water against the hull, the occasional drip from an oar blade, and beneath those close sounds, the wider soundscape of the lake spreading outward in all directions. Sound travels very differently over water than over land. The flat, unobstructed surface of a lake allows sound waves to carry much farther than they would through a landscape of trees and hills and buildings, which is why a conversation held in a normal voice on the water can sometimes be heard clearly from a surprising distance across the surface. This carrying quality of waterborne sound has practical consequences. A rowing boat approaching a fishing spot quietly is genuinely quieter to the fish below than many anglers realize, because sound vibrations transmitted through the hull and into the water can travel considerable distances, and fish, with their pressure-sensitive lateral lines, are exquisitely tuned to detect exactly those kinds of structural vibrations moving through their medium. A family of ducks crosses the boat's path 30 meters ahead, the mother leading a loose flotilla of ducklings with the unhurried authority of someone who has made this crossing many times. Mallard ducklings are capable of swimming within hours of hatching, a developmental strategy called precocial development that stands in sharp contrast to the helpless, nest-bound chicks of species like the kingfisher or the reed warbler. The duckling's waterproofing, however, is not fully developed at hatching. It comes from contact with the mother's own preen feathers, which transfer waterproofing oils to the ducklings during brooding. A duckling separated from its mother too early will lose buoyancy and become waterlogged in a way that a fully developed adult never would, a vulnerability that makes the first weeks of a mallard's life among the most precarious of any waterbirds. The mother duck glances at the drifting boat with the expression of someone who has decided, after brief consideration, that it does not warrant further attention, and the flotilla continues on its unhurried way toward the reed bed. Watching them go, you find yourself thinking about the extraordinary variety of ways that life manages to exist on and in and around the same body of water simultaneously, each species occupying its own layer, its own feeding time, its own particular relationship with the surface. The lake supports all of them without apparent effort, cycling nutrients and energy through its system with a self-regulating efficiency that no human-engineered system has yet come close to matching. The afternoon heat has begun to produce something visible at the water's surface, a very slight shimmer just above it, the air immediately over the warm water moving in slow, lazy thermals. On particularly warm afternoons, this thermal activity above a lake surface can generate its own local weather. The moisture evaporating continuously from the lake surface rises in these thermals and can, under the right atmospheric conditions, condense into small cumulus clouds that form directly above the lake and nowhere else. A lake, in other words, can manufacture its own clouds, private weather, generated by the simple interaction of warm water, sunlight, and moving air. Lakes in mountainous regions can amplify this effect significantly, producing afternoon storms that seem to materialize directly from the water itself and which experienced local rowers learn to read and respect with considerable seriousness. The clouds today are innocent, high, slow-moving, and entirely unconcerned with drama, and the light they cast as they pass over the sun produces a slow sequence of shadow and brightness across the water that is almost musical in its rhythm. In the brief cool of a cloud shadow, the surface darkens and the lake looks deeper, its colors shifting from warm gold-green to something cooler and bluer. Then the cloud passes and the warmth and color return, and the surface lifts again. A cormorant sits on a half-submerged branch near the far edge of the open water, holding its wings out to either side in the characteristic spread-wing posture that is one of the most recognizable silhouettes in the lakeside landscape. Unlike ducks and most waterbirds, cormorants have feathers that are not fully waterproof, which makes them more hydrodynamic underwater. They are exceptional divers and pursuit hunters, capable of reaching depths of several meters, but means they must dry their feathers after diving or they become too waterlogged to fly efficiently. The spread-winged posture is simply the cormorant solving a practical problem, standing in the sun like laundry on a line, with the patience of a creature that has no particular objection to waiting. The boat turns slowly in the drift and the afternoon arranges itself around it. The oars rest across the gunwales, still dripping slowly into the water below. The lake holds a warmth now that it did not have at dawn, accumulated over hours of direct sun, and that warmth rises from the surface in a way you can feel on your face if you close your eyes and simply sit. A lake's thermal mass, its capacity to absorb and slowly release heat, is one of its most significant ecological functions, moderating the temperature of the surrounding landscape, delaying the first frosts of autumn, and creating the mild, humid microclimates that allow certain plants and animals to exist at latitudes slightly beyond their typical range. The lake, in this sense, is not merely a feature of the landscape. It is an active participant in shaping it, warming the air above it, feeding the soil around it, and providing a biological anchor for the entire community of living things that have gathered at its edges. Somewhere beneath the boat, in the warm upper water, a fish turns. The lake continues its afternoon. The oars are ready when you are. There is a precise moment in the late afternoon when the light on a lake changes in a way that is difficult to describe but impossible to miss. It is not simply that the sun has moved lower, it is that the quality of the light itself seems to thicken, to acquire a warmth and a weight that morning light never carries. The shadows on the water lengthen and soften simultaneously, and the reflections of the trees and sky become richer, more saturated, as if the lake has decided to take the day's color seriously for the first time. Rowers who have spent many hours on open water often describe this transition as the most beautiful part of the whole day, and it is easy, sitting in a gently moving boat with the afternoon deepening around you, to understand exactly what they mean. Pick up the oars again and move with it. The water feels different in this light, more willing somehow, more cooperative, and the rowing carries a satisfaction that is specifically afternoon in character. The strokes feel longer and more settled than they did in the bright urgency of the morning, and the boat responds with an ease that speaks of water that has been warming and settling all day. The surface is calmer now than it was in the breezy middle hours, the wind having eased as the temperature differential between land and water reduced through the afternoon. This evening calming of lake surfaces is reliable enough that traditional fishing cultures across the world built their schedules around it, setting out in the late afternoon when the water was its smoothest and the fish, responding to dropping light levels, were beginning to move toward the surface to feed. The feeding activity that begins as the light drops is one of the lake's great daily performances. Across the surface, fish begin to rise with increasing frequency, their rings overlapping and multiplying until the water looks as if it is raining upward from below. The largest rings come from the largest fish. A good-sized trout dimpling the surface leaves a ring that can be half a meter across and carries enough surface tension disruption to be visible for a minute or more after the fish has gone. Reading these rise rings is a skill that takes time to develop but rewards the effort generously. A slow, deliberate sipping rise indicates a fish taking surface insects one at a time with considered precision. A slashing, splashy rise suggests a fish chasing prey that is attempting to escape, usually small fish fry skittering across the surface. Each rise form is a sentence in a language that the lake writes continuously across its surface, available to anyone patient enough to learn to read it. The insects that trigger this evening rise have been waiting all day in the water, living their larval lives among the stones and sediment of the lake bed. Many of the most important freshwater insects, mayflies, caddisflies, stoneflies, spend the overwhelming majority of their lives as aquatic larvae, breathing dissolved oxygen through gills and feeding in the darkness of the lake bed for periods ranging from several months to several years. The adult winged form, which most people recognize and which does all the flying and reproducing, lives for only a matter of days, sometimes only hours. The mayfly, whose adult life is so brief that it represents the origin of the word ephemeral in several languages, completes its entire adult existence without eating. Its mouth parts are vestigial, non-functional. It emerges from the water, mates, lays its eggs on the surface, and is gone, having done everything required of an adult life in the span of a single afternoon or evening. Watch the surface during a mayfly hatch and the lake becomes briefly theatrical. The insects emerge in pulses, their pale wings catching the low light as they lift from the surface, and the fish respond with a feeding frenzy that can make normally cautious and invisible creatures suddenly very visible indeed. A large brown trout that has spent the day in deep, cold, Inaccessible water will move to within centimeters of the surface during a good hatch, its back sometimes breaking through as it feeds, its movements confident and purposeful in a way that daytime behavior rarely shows. This is the hour the lake saves its most generous revelations for, and sitting quietly in a drifting boat as it unfolds around you is one of the finest things open water has to offer. The evening light does something remarkable to the reflections on the water at this hour. As the sun drops toward the tree-line, its rays strike the surface at an increasingly oblique angle, and the Fresnel effect that made the water transparent at midday reverses itself, turning the lake's surface back into a mirror with the day's accumulated colors held in it. The reflection of a late afternoon sky in calm lake water is among the most photographed and painted natural subjects in human artistic history, and the reason is straightforward: the water does not simply copy the sky above it but enriches and deepens what it reflects, adding a dimension of stillness and depth to colors that in the sky itself are fleeting and changing. Turner painted lake reflections because they gave him something the sky alone could not: a second sky, held still. A kingfisher passes low across the water ahead of the boat, moving with that characteristic arrow-straight flight that makes it look less like a bird and more like a thrown jewel. It is gone before the eye has fully registered it, leaving only an afterimage of electric blue and a memory of speed. The kingfisher hunts by hovering above the water or watching from a fixed perch, then diving with its eyes open and its aim adjusted for the refraction of light at the water's surface, a perceptual correction that the bird makes instinctively, accounting for the way water bends light and displaces the apparent position of a fish from its actual one. A kingfisher aiming at the visual position of a fish would miss every time. Instead, it aims at where the fish actually is, having learned through early trial and error to distrust the image the water presents and trust instead the corrected calculation made somewhere in that brilliantly colored head. The oars pull through the golden water and the home bank is close now, its familiar outline detailed and warm in the late light. The reeds at the water's edge are catching the low sun along their upper stems and glowing a pale amber that is entirely different from their morning green. The lake holds the evening the way it held the morning, completely, without resistance, offering the light everything it has to work with and asking nothing in return. A water surface, when you consider what it actually does, receiving everything the sky sends down, reflecting it back enriched, absorbing what remains and distributing it through the living system below, is one of the most generous and least celebrated interfaces in the natural world. The strokes are slower now, and longer, and the boat moves through water that is beginning to cool at its very surface as the afternoon warmth peaks and starts its slow release back into the evening air. The day is not over. The lake is not done. But something is shifting, settling, preparing for a different kind of quiet than the morning offered. The oars feel it. The water feels it. Even the air, just barely, feels it. Keep rowing. The best of the evening is still ahead. Evening arrives on a lake not all at once but in layers, the way the lake itself is layered, one thing giving way gradually to another, each transition so smooth that you cannot point to the exact moment when afternoon became something else. The light is horizontal now, coming across the water rather than down onto it, and this changes everything it touches. The boat's shadow stretches out long and thin behind you across the surface. The oar blades, lifting from the water at the end of each stroke, trail small threads of light as the drops fall back. The far tree line has gone from green to a dark, warm silhouette, and above it the sky has begun its evening performance, that slow accumulation of color that starts as a deepening of the blue overhead and works its way down through the spectrum toward the horizon, where the first suggestions of amber and rose are beginning to gather above the trees. Row slowly now. This is not a time for urgency. The water deserves full attention at this hour, and so does everything moving on and above it. The lake's evening population is different from its daytime one, and the transition between the two happens across the water simultaneously, like a shift change conducted in silence. The swallows and swifts that spent the afternoon hours cutting low arcs above the surface, sipping water and taking insects on the wing, are beginning to give way to the bats that will take their place as darkness gathers. This aerial handover between day-flying and night-flying insect hunters is one of the most elegant examples of niche partitioning in the natural world, two groups of animals exploiting the same resource, the same airspace, the same insect populations, simply by occupying different shifts in the same working day. The bats, when they begin to appear, emerge from the tree line and the spaces beneath the bank with a flight style immediately distinguishable from any bird. Where swallows move in long, confident curves, bats move in rapid, irregular zigzags, changing direction with a suddenness that seems to defy momentum. This is echolocation at work, the bat emitting pulses of ultrasound too high for human hearing and processing the returning echoes to build a real-time three-dimensional map of the space ahead. A single bat in pursuit of a moth above a lake's surface is processing an extraordinary amount of acoustic information every second, distinguishing the echo of its target from the flat echo of the water below, the irregular echoes of the reed bed, and the echoes of other bats working the same airspace. Bats hunting over water benefit from the surface's acoustic properties. The flat, echo-free return from open water makes insect targets stand out with particular clarity against that smooth acoustic background, which is why lakes and rivers are among the most productive foraging environments for many bat species. The water's surface in this evening light has taken on a quality that painters have always found irresistible and photographers find endlessly frustrating, a luminosity that seems to come from within the water rather than from the sky above it. This is partly an optical effect of the low-angle light penetrating the upper water layer and scattering back upward through suspended particles, and partly a result of the way the eye processes low-contrast, high-color scenes in dimming light. But it is also, in a very real sense, biological. Certain species of phytoplankton and bacteria present in lake water are bioluminescent, capable of producing their own cold light through chemical reactions within their cells. In lakes with significant populations of these organisms, disturbing the water at night can produce brief flashes or glows of blue-green light, a phenomenon most commonly associated with ocean bays but occurring in freshwater environments as well. Stir an oar through a lake on a warm, still night and you may occasionally see the water itself respond with a faint, ghostly luminescence, the lake, briefly, lit from within. The evening feeding of the fish has reached its peak and is now beginning to ease as the surface light fades below the threshold that sight-feeding species require. Trout and perch, which rely primarily on vision to hunt, become less active as the light drops, retreating from the surface and settling into their nighttime holding positions in deeper water. But other species are just beginning their most active period. Eels, those extraordinary and deeply mysterious fish, are primarily nocturnal and emerge from their daytime hiding places in the sediment and among submerged roots as darkness approaches. The European eel undertakes one of the most remarkable migrations of any animal on Earth, breeding in the Sargasso Sea in the western Atlantic, then drifting as larvae on ocean currents for up to 3 years before reaching European freshwaters, where they live for decades before making the return journey of up to 6,000 kilometers back to their breeding grounds to spawn once and die. An eel resting in the mud at the bottom of a quiet lake may have drifted across an ocean as a leaf-thin transparent larva before arriving in that exact spot, a history so improbable it reads like invention. The oars rest across the gunwales for a moment and the boat drifts in the evening calm. Above the water, the first star has appeared in the darkening blue overhead, barely visible, requiring peripheral vision to confirm, but undeniably there. The lake sees it too, reflected in the smooth surface ahead of the boat, that single point of light repeated in the water with a steadiness that the sky itself cannot quite manage. A lake on a still evening holds the stars with particular fidelity, and the reflection of a night sky in calm water has a depth and completeness that can briefly confuse the senses, the water seeming less like a surface and more like a window into a version of space that exists below as well as above. A fish rolls near the boat, not a leap but a slow, lazy roll, back and tail breaking the surface with the unhurried ease of a creature completely at home in its world. The roll leaves a smooth, circular patch on the water's surface that persists longer than a ripple, a window of calm within calm, before the surface closes over it and returns to its mirror-like consistency. These rolling fish, often carp or bream in the evening hours, are not feeding but breathing, rolling at the surface to access the slightly more oxygen-rich layer right at the water-air interface during the hours when aquatic plant photosynthesis has ceased for the day and dissolved oxygen levels in the deeper water have dropped to their daily minimum. The lake's oxygen cycle, produced by plants and phytoplankton during daylight, consumed by all living things continuously, replenished by surface exchange with the atmosphere, runs on a 24-hour rhythm as reliable as the day itself. The home bank is close now, its familiar silhouette warm and dark against the amber sky. The reeds have gone quiet, the last reed warblers tucked into their woven nests above the water. The heron has returned to its roost somewhere in the tall trees back from the bank. The surface of the lake is as calm as it was this morning when the journey began, and yet it is entirely different, carrying the warmth and the history of a full day in its upper layers, its colors richer, its quality of stillness deeper and more earned than the fragile quiet of dawn. The oars take a last few strokes. The bank is very close. The water holds the last of the light. The bow of the boat touches the bank with a sound so small it barely qualifies as a sound at all, a soft, wooden nudge against the earth, a whisper of hull against mud and root, and the journey that began in the cool gray of early morning arrives at its end in the amber and rose of a lake evening. Sit for a moment before stepping out. The water is still moving gently beneath the hull, responding to the last strokes of the oars, and the boat rocks with a slow, cradle-like patience that invites one final period of stillness before the return to land and all the noise and pace that land carries with it. This threshold moment, still on the water, already nearly home, is one worth inhabiting fully, because the lake has spent an entire day offering itself to your attention, and the least a rower can do is accept that final offering with gratitude and quiet. Look out across the water one last time. The lake in the last light of the day is a complete world unto itself, and everything it has shown you across these hours has been part of a system so intricately connected that pulling on any one thread immediately reveals its attachment to a dozen others. The ripple from a leaping fish reaches the reed bed and stirs a nesting bird. The warmth stored in the upper water through the afternoon rises as vapor into the cooling evening air and will return as morning mist or distant rainfall. The sediment drifting slowly to the bottom carries the chemical record of today into the archive of centuries below. Nothing the lake does is isolated. Nothing is wasted. Every movement, every exchange of energy and matter, feeds forward into the next moment of the system's life. This connectedness is most visible, perhaps, in the remarkable chemical cycle that the lake runs continuously between its surface and its bed. Phosphorus, one of the key nutrients driving the growth of algae and aquatic plants, enters the lake through rainfall and runoff from the surrounding land, settles into the sediment over time, and is released back into the water column by the activity of bacteria in the lake bed under low oxygen conditions. A single nutrient atom can cycle between the surface water, the living organisms, the sediment, and back again multiple times across a single year, participating in algal blooms, fish bodies, decomposition, and regrowth in a loop that has no beginning and no end. The lake does not consume its resources. It circulates them, endlessly, with a metabolic efficiency that defines what a healthy ecosystem actually means. The mist is already beginning to form at the far end of the lake, where the water is shallowest and the evening air is coolest. Lake mist forms when warm, moisture-laden air immediately above the water's surface meets cooler air above it, causing the water vapor to condense into the thin, trailing wisps that drift above the surface with a ghostly deliberateness that has inspired painters and poets across every culture that has ever lived beside still water. This mist is not merely beautiful, it is functional, part of the lake's contribution to the local water cycle, returning moisture to the surrounding landscape in a form that meadows, woodlands, and the animals within them depend upon through dry seasons. A lake does not hold its water. It shares it, continuously and generously, with everything around it. A pair of swans move slowly across the far end of the lake, their white shapes catching the last of the pink sky with an almost theatrical perfection. Mute swans, for all their elegance, are among the heaviest flying birds in the world, with large individuals reaching weights of 15 kilograms or more. Taking off from water requires a long, effortful run across the surface, both feet paddling rapidly, wings beating hard, that can cover 100 meters before the bird finally achieves the airspeed needed to lift clear. Once airborne, however, they are magnificent, and the sound of a swan's wings in flight, that deep, rhythmic whooshing that carries across a lake with remarkable clarity, is one of those sounds that, once heard, is never quite forgotten. It is the sound of something large and improbable choosing, against considerable odds, to become briefly weightless. The darkening water is showing its night colors now, deep blue-gray in the open stretches, near black beneath the trees, and across the surface, the first suggestions of reflected starlight are beginning to appear. Stars reflected in still water appear slightly blurred compared to their originals, a consequence of the micromovements of the surface scattering the reflected light across a tiny area rather than returning it from a single point. This blurring increases with any surface disturbance, which is why the clearest and most faithful star reflections occur on nights of absolute calm, when the lake's surface has reached that state of near-perfect stillness that feels less like a material and more like a boundary between two versions of the same sky. On such nights, sitting in a boat at rest on a dark lake, the sky above and its reflection below can become briefly indistinguishable, and the sensation of floating between two universes of stars is one that anyone who has experienced it finds essentially impossible to adequately describe. The frogs have begun. Somewhere in the reed bed to the left, a single frog has started what will soon become a chorus, that ancient, resonant calling that has been rising from the edges of freshwater bodies since long before human beings existed to hear it. Frogs were among the first vertebrates to develop vocal communication, and the calling of male frogs, produced by forcing air across vocal cords and amplifying it through inflatable vocal sacs, can carry across a lake surface with a carrying power that seems entirely out of proportion to the size of the animal producing it. A large chorus of frogs around a lake at dusk can be heard from several hundred meters away, and to anyone who grew up near water, it is one of the most immediate and transporting sounds in the natural world, capable of returning you instantly to every evening you have ever spent at the edge of still water. Somewhere out in the dark water, a fish leaps one final time, the day's last leap, a brief silver arc caught for a fraction of a second in the remaining light before the water closes over it without ceremony. That leap, the last of 100 small spectacles the lake has offered today, carries in it everything the water has been saying since the first or stroke of the morning. That life here is continuous and abundant. That the surface is a boundary endlessly crossed in both directions. That energy and matter and beauty move through this system in loops that began long before the first boat was built and will continue long after the last one has been pulled from the water for the final time. The oars are shipped. The boat is still. The lake breathes around it in the dark, warm and alive and complete, holding its fish and its sediment and its centuries and its mist in the same unhurried embrace it has always offered to still water, still air, and still minds willing to receive it. Step out onto the bank. Carry the boat up above the waterline. Turn once more to look at the lake before the path leads you back into the trees and the ordinary world reassembles itself around you. It will be here in the morning. It has always been here in the morning. The water does not sleep, and it does not wait, and it does not ask anything of you except that when you come back to its edge with your oars in your hands and the day still ahead of you, you bring the same attention and the same willingness to be surprised that you brought today. The lake will do the rest. It always does.